The rain came down hard that evening, washing the streets of Arlington into a blur of headlights and puddles. Near the entrance of an old diner, a homeless man sat hunched against the wall, a tattered army green jacket wrapped tight around his shoulders. His beard was gray, uneven, and his hands trembled slightly as he held a paper cup half filled with cold coffee. No one really looked at him anymore. People just passed by. Inside, Officer Daniel Rhodes watched the man through the fogged glass while sipping his own coffee. The diner was his usual post after late shifts, a quiet place to unwind before heading home. But that night, something about the man outside caught his eye. The way he sat perfectly still despite the cold, his eyes scanning the street like he was waiting for something. "Guy's been here 3 nights straight," the waitress murmured as she refilled Daniel's cup. "Doesn't talk to anyone, just stares." Daniel nodded. Probably looking for trouble. When the call came over the radio, "Suspicious. Individual near Main and Jefferson, possible trespassing." Rhodes sighed, tossed a few bills on the counter, and stepped out into the rain. "All right, buddy," he said, approaching slowly. "You can't sit here all night. Private property." The old man didn't answer. He looked up with pale blue eyes that seemed far too steady for someone living on the streets. His voice when he spoke was calm. "Just resting, officer. I'll move along soon." "Now would be good," Rhodes replied, reaching for his shoulder. The man didn't resist, but when the officer touched his arm, something unexpected happened. His reflexes kicked in. A sharp twist, controlled and precise, and suddenly Rhodes's wrist was locked. The grip was firm but not painful, and before the officer could react, the man released him, backing away slowly. "Easy," he said. "Old habits. Didn't mean to startle you." Rhodes froze. That kind of move wasn't something a random vagrant just knew. It was military, specific, trained. "All right," Rhodes said carefully, hand resting on his holster. "Let's see some ID." The man reached into his coat and pulled out an old, faded wallet. Inside was a driver's license, long expired, and a photo that looked like it had seen too many years. The name read Michael Harland. Rhodes frowned. "License is 20 years out of date. You got anywhere to stay, Michael?" The man shook his head. "Used to, not anymore." "Then I'm going to need you to come with me," Rhodes said. "Just routine." The man didn't argue. He simply nodded, collected his things, and followed. As they walked through the wet streets toward the patrol car, the city lights reflected off the puddles like ghosts of another time. Inside the precinct, they booked him for vagrancy and minor trespassing. Routine stuff. But when they ran his fingerprints through the national database, something went wrong. The screen blinked, then froze. Then a red flag appeared across the monitor. "Match found. Classified clearance required." Rhodes frowned and tried again. Same result. Another officer leaned over. "What the hell is that?" The sergeant on duty squinted at the code. "Never seen that before. Says restricted. We're not authorized to open it." "Restricted?" Rhodes repeated. "For a homeless guy?" The sergeant picked up the phone, calling it in. Within minutes, the entire tone in the room changed. Officers who had been laughing at the man now spoke in hushed voices. 2 plainclothes federal agents entered through the front door, flashing badges before anyone could ask. "Where's the detainee?" one of them asked. Rhodes gestured toward the holding room. The agents exchanged a glance and walked in. Through the glass, Rhodes watched as the older man sat quietly on the metal bench, head bowed, hands folded. The agents leaned in, whispered something, and then one of them snapped to attention and saluted. The entire room went still. By the time the agents came out, their faces were unreadable. "We're taking him," the taller one said. "On what charge?" Rhodes asked. "None," the agent replied. "He doesn't belong in your system. Never did." "That's not an answer." The agent paused. "You'll get your report, but let me give you some advice, officer. Forget the name Michael Harland." Rhodes didn't. He couldn't. Something about the man had lodged in his mind. The reflex, the calm tone, the the quiet dignity. That night, after his shift ended, he found himself searching through old databases, piecing together scraps from public records. Nothing came up. Not a single trace of Michael Harland in the last 20 years. The next morning, an unmarked black SUV pulled up outside the station. Inside sat one of the same agents. "Rhodes, right?" he asked. "Director wants to talk." They drove across town to a federal building with no signs. The walls inside were bare, sterile, and silent. The agent led him down a corridor and stopped outside a closed door. "Inside," he said. Rhodes entered cautiously. Behind a large desk sat a man in a dark suit with deep lines around his eyes. "You were the arresting officer?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Rhodes replied. "What's this about? Who is he?" The director slid a thin folder across the desk. "That man you brought in was declared KIA in 2003, Operation Echo Storm." Rhodes frowned. "That was overseas, right?" The director nodded. "Afghanistan. Classified rescue mission. A Delta Force element was pinned down after an ambush. Intelligence compromised. Casualties were severe. Harlan's team went dark. Only fragments of the operation ever made it back. Then how is he here? That's what we're trying to figure out." Rhodes opened the folder. Inside were grainy photos, aerial shots of a valley, burned-out vehicles, radio logs, and a single typed page marked Top Secret. In the corner was a name circled in red: Harland, MJ, Commander. "He wasn't just part of the mission," the director said quietly. "He led it." Rhodes sat back in silence. The pieces didn't fit. A man thought dead for over 2 decades, now sitting in a holding cell under an overpass when they found him. "He saved 13 operators," the director continued. "Extracted them through enemy territory alone. When the evac failed, he stayed behind. We never recovered him. The mission was buried, the details classified above Top Secret." Rhodes looked up. "So where's he been all this time?" The director hesitated. "That's not a question anyone can answer yet." Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and quiet. The SUV dropped Rhodes back at the station, but his thoughts were miles away. He couldn't shake the image of the man's eyes, sharp, aware, too alive for someone who had lived invisible for decades. That evening, Rhodes went to the diner again. The waitress leaned over the counter. "Hey, did they ever figure out who that guy was?" Rhodes stared at his coffee. "Yeah," he said softly. "They figured it out." A week later, Rhodes drove past the old bridge where the homeless shelters handed out meals every Friday night. There, among the line of shivering figures, stood the same man, Michael Harland. No agents, no security detail, no trace of the classified story behind him. Just an old man, serving soup to others. Rhodes parked and approached. "You're a hard man to track," he said quietly. Harland smiled faintly. "That's the point." "Why are you here? Why not, I don't know, home? Somewhere better?" Harland ladled soup into another bowl before answering. "Because they didn't all make it back, officer. Some of us don't get to go home until the debt's paid." Rhodes swallowed. "That mission, Echo Storm, you were the commander." Harland didn't confirm it. He didn't have to. His silence was enough. "They said you were dead." "I was," Harland said simply. "For a long time." The officer looked around at the crowd. Other veterans, drifters, people lost between worlds. "You're helping them." "I'm one of them," Harland said, his eyes distant. "And they need someone who understands what it's like to come back from nowhere." The faint rumble of an engine drew Rhodes's attention. A black sedan rolled up quietly. From it stepped a Marine colonel in dress uniform. He walked straight toward Harland, boots clicking on the wet pavement. Without a word, the colonel stopped, squared his shoulders, and saluted. Every voice under that bridge fell silent. Harland hesitated, then returned the salute, his hand steady despite the years. The colonel's voice broke the quiet. "Sir, on behalf of those you saved, welcome home." Rhodes felt his throat tighten. In that single gesture, the weight of 2 decades lifted. Not for glory, not for medals, but for recognition long overdue. When the colonel left, Harlan turned back to the line, his hand steady once more as he filled another bowl. "They don't need to know my story," he said softly. "They just need to know someone's still looking out for them." Rhodes nodded slowly. "I'll make sure they remember anyway." But Harlan only smiled, eyes fixed on the dark river beyond. "Then you weren't listening, son. Some stories aren't meant to be remembered. They're meant to be lived." The wind picked up, carrying the sound of distant traffic, the soft shuffle of boots on wet concrete, and the quiet dignity of a man who had once vanished into classified silence, and returned not as a soldier, but as a guardian of the forgotten.